In September 1991, Guns N' Roses released 2 albums, Use Your Illusion Volume 1 and 2, an industry first of 2 separate albums on the same day. They were arguably the biggest band around with the world at their feet. Behind the scenes though, the band was showing signs of the arduous toil of this achievement. This is the story behind the album and how it was recorded. Rehearsals initially began in Chicago in the summer of '89, but only Slash, Duff McKagan and Steve Adler actually turned up. So with Axl Rose and Izzy Stradlin's absence, they proved to be, in Slash's words, a waste of time. Having said that, they did manage to do some work on songs such as Pretty Tied Up, which was originally written by Stradlin and then finished off without him, and Estranged when Axl did show up eventually. Although this initial session showed some reluctance to get new material together, this may have been in part to having a backlog of songs left over from the Appetite for Destruction sessions, like You Could Be Mine and Back Off Bitch, and some even predating the band. Axl had written November Rain in 1984. The band even demoed it at Sound City in '86. Axl also had some songs he'd written with Wes Arkeen. These were The Garden, Bad Obsession and Yesterdays. Wes was described by Slash as a wild character, of the sort you only seem to get back in the '80s. Slash recalls the process being very splintered and quite a struggle, but eventually getting everything together on one fateful night at his house in the Laurel Canyon Hills. He said, "That was one time in all of that the band felt like itself. Just the guys like I was always used to. Izzy, Duff and Axl and I compiled over 36 songs in one evening. That was the only group writing session we had, where we were all together in one room. Any normal functioning band would then find themselves heading straight to the studio to begin recording in earnest. But the state of the individual members at this point meant that it was no easy task. Stradlin had managed to become sober by this stage, but Slash was a heroin addict. McKagan was an alcoholic, knocking back vodka at a rate of 3 or 4 litres a day, and Adler was both a heroin addict and an alcoholic. When recording did begin, it was clear to the band that Adler was in no state to perform. Whilst trying to record the song Civil War, Adler was struggling, apparently trying 20 times to nail a drum take, with Slash and Duff becoming increasingly frustrated, resorting to shouting at him. Adler said, "I got a call a few weeks later to go to the office to sign stacks of papers. I realised I was sacked, of course, and I had to go to court to get the royalties I was owed." In 1993, he was awarded $2.25 million in an out-of-court settlement for his contribution prior to Use Your Illusion, but no writing credits for the album. Slash was a big fan of the Cult drummer Matt Sorum, and after an invitation to join them, Matt was thrust into the recording sessions pretty quickly, recording Bob Dylan's Knocking on Heaven's Door. This was included on the Tom Cruise film Days of Thunder the same month. Although they admired Matt Sorum's abilities, McKagan and Stradlin felt Adler's departure through the music's groove and felt that they'd lost a big part of the band's identity. Although there would be many more personnel struggles to follow, with hindsight, this shift can easily be seen as the tip of the iceberg. Civil War was then completed the following month, containing Adler's final performance with the band. The final drum track was apparently pieced together from 36 different takes that Adler had played prior to his sacking. At this point, the band were getting pressure from their label Geffen. With the success of Appetite for Destruction, the head of the label, David Geffen, was anticipating a similar return and wanted to have the album out as soon as possible before a planned sale of the company. The main recording sessions got underway at A&M Studios in July 1990, with Mike Klink at the helm as producer. According to Slash, they managed to bash out 36 basic tracks in 36 days, although Stradlin was becoming more of a distant figure at this point, turning up to only 1 in 3 sessions they did, despite contributing a lot to the songwriting. In fact, Izzy's parts were mostly taken from the demos he sent to the band while trying to avoid them. Slash's guitar collection had grown quite a bit since the first record, although his number one was still his Chris Derrick built 59 Les Paul replica. He played many guitars on the record, including a 58V and a 58 Explorer. He said, "There's a certain nasal sound you can hear on Heaven's Door and Locomotive and a couple of other songs. That's just the tone control on the V, it's not a wah pedal. I used one of those small-scale Music Mans like Keith Richards has. There's a Travis Bean that I used for slide on Bad Obsession. When I first got into slide, I went to a Joe Perry project show. He had a Travis Bean and it sounded killer. So when I saw one in the paper, I bought it straight away. I had several Guilds, a nice 12-string and a couple of great dreadnoughts. I used a Gibson J100 too. I played maybe 20 different guitars on Use Your Illusion. A Strat, a Dobro, a 6-string bass, a banjo, some acoustics. But the sound I'm recognised for is my Les Paul through a Marshall half-stack. This Marshall amp used for the most part was an early JCM 800 2203 4-input model, modified by Frank Levy. Mike Klink mic'd the guitar cabs with a Shure SM57 into a Neve 1073 preamp using a touch of compression with a DBX 160. An AKG 452 was used for the acoustic guitar parts. Duff McKagan was using his Fender Jazz Bass Special into a Gallon & Kruger 400RB amp. A DI was also taken to blend in with the amp sound. Matt Sorum's massive drum sound came from his Yamaha Rock Tour custom kit featuring a 24-inch bass drum and deep toms. According to the man himself, he used around 20 different snare drums on the album. There was a snare we nicknamed Big Red. That was an old Tammer that I used on November Rain, Don't Cry and Estranged. It was a 14x8 birch drum. And on the song Locomotive, I used a Killer White 14x6 Noble & Cooley. On some of the real radical rock stuff, I had a Zildjian Noble & Cooley. We only came out with a few of those and I still have it. It's made out of Zildjian brass with Noble & Cooley hardware. It was an insane sounding bell brass drum. We also used the Ludwig Black Beauty as well. People joke with me a lot about November Rain, asking why I did that tom fill so much. I wanted to create a signature, a musical part of the song, that was a hook, so I kept doing the same fill. That same fill leads through November Rain, Estranged and Don't Cry. The reason I did that was because those three songs were a trilogy, so I tied them together. With the backing tracks in place, they were handed over to legendary mix engineer Bob Clearmountain. However, the opinion was that the sound was too polished, so they went to Bill Price, whose work they admired with the Sex Pistols and the Clash, and more what they had in mind. Price remembers getting the job. I did my audition on Right Next Door to Hell. It's a very straightforward upfront rocker, so I did a loud, in-your-face, heavily compressed mix of the backing track, and then added Axl's vocals on top, post the compressors, so that you could hear what he was singing. Everybody loved it, so they hired me. The overdub sessions began at the record plant at the end of 1990, but other commitments took their attention almost immediately. The album was scheduled to be finished by then, and this is evident with the album's tour kicking off in January 91 at the Rock in Rio festival, a full 8 months before the album was actually released. Interestingly, before going on stage in Brazil, Axl made the other band members sign documents granting him total legal ownership of the name Guns N' Roses. Of course, the album had to be finished, and a lot of this was done on the road at many different studios across America. Bill Price remembers the complications. The mix of November Rain was on the board for a week. DAT tapes flew back and forth, harmony lines were being changed and different guitar licks put in. The only way to find out which tracks to use would be to get the entire band in the studio at the same time, which seemed like quite a normal thing to me. When I mentioned this to the band's management though, they were totally horrified. Those two albums were about the most complicated mix, musically, technically, people-wise, that I ever did in my life. This process would go on for another 7 months before completion. There were a few special guests that came in at the overdub stage, including Michael Monroe playing harmonica and sax on Bad Obsession, Alice Cooper adding vocals to The Garden, and Shannon Hoon of Blind Melon singing backing vocals on 5 songs, including Live and Let Die, Don't Cry and November Rain. Axl and Shannon knew each other from their hometown in Indiana, with Axl and Shannon's sister being high school friends. They did manage to release another single, with You Could Be Mine, released on the Terminator 2 Judgment Day soundtrack in June, but it wasn't until the end of July that the final mixes and artwork would be approved by the band members. This wasn't the end though, with Axl adding the song My World without informing any of the other band members. The album was finally released on the 17th of September 1991, with the fans desperate to get their copies. To facilitate this demand, many record stores opened at midnight to satisfy them. The albums occupied the top 2 Billboard chart spots after the first week, with Use Your Illusion 2 taking the top spot selling 770,000 copies, and Use Your Illusion 1 selling 685,000 at number 2. The initial success did give way to criticism that there were too many filler tracks on the albums, despite big praise for songs like November Rain and Coma. The album's tour would take in 194 shows in 27 countries, making it one of the biggest and longest in rock history, although it was marred by riots, late starts and cancellations. It wouldn't be long after this that it would all unravel, but for a brief few years, it's easy to say they were the biggest thing in rock.
Thanks to the lame-ass security, I'm going home.